Before your coffee was poured into a paper cup, before the barista called your name, before the beans were bagged, roasted, or shipped, someone paid for it. And not with money. They paid in blood, in chains, in silence. This is not just the story of coffee, it's the story of conquest, of slavery, of empire. Welcome to Coffee and Coffins. This is episode 1, The Blood Price of Arabica. Let's start in the highlands of Ethiopia centuries ago, the birthplace of coffee Arabica. Legend says a goat herd named Kaldi noticed his goats dancing after eating bright red cherries from a certain tree. Curious, Kaldi tried the fruit and felt a sudden jolt of energy. Word spread to monks who used it to stay awake during prayers. That's the legend. But what's fact is that Arabica coffee thrived in Ethiopia's forests, and from there, it began its long, dark journey into the wider world. By the 15th century, coffee had made its way to the Arabian Peninsula, especially Yemen. There, in the port city of Mocha, it became a daily ritual and a sacred drink. Sufi mystics used it to maintain spiritual alertness. Merchants drank it while trading news, stories, and secrets. Yemen became the first global exporter, shipping roasted beans across the Islamic world. And the Arab world did something very strategic. They banned the export of fertile coffee beans. You could buy it roasted, you could brew it, but no one, no foreigner, no outsider, was allowed to grow it. Coffee became the guarded jewel of Arabia, a botanical monopoly. Break that rule, and you risked death. But the rule didn't hold for long. Enter the Dutch in the early 1600s. Through force, espionage, and political maneuvering, they smuggled coffee plants out of Yemen. They took them to Java, a colony in what is now Indonesia, and there a new coffee empire began. But it didn't grow on fertile land alone. It grew on forced labor. The Dutch used enslaved Javanese workers to tend the fields. Thousands were subjected to brutal hours, starvation, and disease. Coffee was no longer a ritual. It was a commodity. And people were the price. From Java, coffee spread across the colonial world. By the 18th century, France, Portugal, Spain, and Britain were all fighting to control its growth and trade. Coffee reached the Caribbean, Central America, Colombia, and Brazil. And on nearly every plantation, enslaved Africans were the workforce. Millions were trafficked across the Atlantic, chained in ships, sold at auction, and sent to work in sugar, tobacco, and coffee fields. Coffee in particular required precision. Each cherry had to be picked by hand only when ripe. So planters didn't want short-term labor. They wanted a permanent, controlled workforce. That meant slavery. Let's pause on Brazil for a moment. By the 1800s, it had become the largest coffee producer in the world. By 1850, it supplied half of the world's beans, and it did so on the backs of enslaved people. Over 1.5 million Africans were brought to Brazil between 1800 and 1850, more than anywhere else in the Americas during that period. Punishments were brutal, food was scarce, and the work was unrelenting. Even after slavery was officially abolished in 1888, the last country in the Western world to do so, the system didn't disappear. It simply evolved into debt bondage, sharecropping, and systems that still exist in echoes today. When you lift a cup of coffee, you're holding more than a drink. You're holding history. Empires built, lives stolen, labor erased. That's the blood price of Arabica. It's not printed on the receipt, it's not listed on the label, but it's there in every sip. In the next episode, we'll follow a French naval officer, a stolen plant, a smuggled plot that reshaped the entire global coffee trade. It's a tale of pirates, glass cases, and espionage on the high seas. If Coffee and Coffins made you think twice about your morning brew, subscribe and leave a review. Maybe share it with a friend. It helps us continue unearthing the crimes behind the coffee.